The documentary Lunchline takes a new look at the school lunch program by exploring its past, current challenges, and opportunities for the future, and features interviews with political figures such as former Secretary of Agriculture Dan Glickman, former Senator George McGovern, and Senator Saxby Chambliss. Here to talk with us about the film in studio are Mike Graziano and Ernie Park, directors of the film. Thanks for being with us here on POTUS, to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to have you here. This music, by the way, is actually featured in the film. The film tracks the behind-the-scenes details of the school lunch program and childhood hunger from key moments from the 1940s, 1960s, and 1980s to the present, revealing political twists, surprising alliances, and more common ground than people might think. I thought it was fascinating, the history behind the school lunch program. I think when people see this, they're going to be riveted by it as well. Ernie, could you start with the 1940s and the beginning of the documentary? You talk about Senator Richard Russell from Georgia. Who was he, and talk about his role in the school lunch program, if you would.
Yeah, I'm going to let Mike talk about that because he's actually from the South and he can represent.
He was, Richard Russell was from Georgia, and he was a Dixiecrat. And he was also a segregationist. And so it's interesting that he was able to partner up with traditional New Deal liberal Jerry Voorhees from California to get school lunch passed. But there was some caveats that the Southern senators put on passage of the bill that, ultimately forced a compromise between the child welfare advocates like Voorhees and Southern senators like Alan Ellender from Louisiana and Richard Russell from Georgia, who are more worried about rural development and agricultural policy.
And one of the things you talk about in the film in those compromises is whether the school lunch program would fall under the purview of the Department of Agriculture or the Secretary of Education, which it eventually did fall under the Department of Agriculture, which explains the involvement of folks like former Secretary Dan Glickman in your film as well. There's a really interesting list of people that are in this movie, political figures, one of them being Saxby Chambliss, who talks about how he actually ended up taking Senator Russell's seat.
I'm very proud of the fact that the seat that I now hold in the United States Senate is the seat that was held by Richard B. Russell. He was able to bring together a group of conservative, liberal, and just simply like-minded members of the Senate who all thought in terms of what's in the best interest of our school children.
Now, how did you approach Senator Chambliss when you wanted him to appear in the film?
Yeah, I think we knew that he had a real interest regarding school lunch and was an advocate for it. His wife is a teacher, and he understands the importance of it. And our desire was to have a film. Things are so polarized, in D.C. now, and one of the great things about the story of school lunch is it involved all these people coming together and compromising. So the idea of it being in the USDA was really, not everybody wanted it to be in the Department of Agriculture, but they knew that in order for this program to be supported, it needed to be in the Department of Agriculture. And so, we just wanted him to participate and to be a voice that we felt like was necessary, because even in the debate about school lunch, it's often people calling each other names but in reality, a lot of them value the same things,
Featured in the film is Senator George McGovern as well, and there's a really kind of heart-wrenching scene where he's talking about, it's present-day George McGovern is an older man. He's looking back on his time as a senator in the late 1960s when he saw a documentary about the South. And in this documentary, there was a young boy, underprivileged, who didn't really get anything to eat at school, and to hear the kid talk about it was so heart-wrenching. And anyway, this is him commenting on that moment.
I remember saying to two of my daughters who were watching that film with me, it's not that little boy who should be ashamed. It's George McGovern, a United States Senator from an agricultural state who served on the Senate Agricultural Committee, and I didn't even know that school lunches were denied to children who couldn't pay full fare for them.
Mike or Ernie, whoever wants to field this, can you talk about how you got the senator's involvement for the film? And then also, what did he do at that point in the 1960s that kind of shepherded a change as far as school lunch?
So it was pretty crazy how we got, not crazy, but it was interesting how we got George McGovern involved, because once we decided to open the film up to interviews, because initially the film we were making was just an observational verite film taking place in one school, and then we realized after shooting for about a year that there was much bigger questions about politics and food policy and everything that school lunch begged that this small film wasn't getting. So we decided to open it up to interviews. And George McGovern was one of the first people we got, because we knew that he had been very influential working with Bob Dole in the 60s to revamp the school lunch program. And so he has a library and a center in South Dakota at a school there. And so I called them and I said, hey, we're doing this film on school lunch. Can we get George McGovern? And they gave me his cell phone number. And it was so crazy because, he's like 90 and just really sharp as a tack. And I called up and he's like, this is George McGovern, and so we set up. He happened to be in Chicago, and we met him where he was giving a lecture, and he was great. And I'll let Ernie talk about maybe some of the stuff he was doing in the 60s.
Yeah, and one of the things we wanted to do is to make sure that the origins of school lunch, that our film dealt with it. Because initially we were very much focused on the present, which I think some people almost see it as a class, like, oh, it's just these people who are privileged who just want organic lunch, and this is what the debate is about. But really it was about hunger and really addressing kids that needed nutrition and food. And what George McGovern was able to do is to identify that not all the students that needed school lunch, they were, because of certain regulations and the way that the politics were working at that time, were not receiving it. And he really kind of, again, brought this coalition to really address people who were not getting access to school lunch.
If you're just joining us, we're talking with Mike Graziano and Ernie Park, directors of the film Lunchline, which takes a look at the school lunch program and, of course, the politics behind it. We've been talking about the history behind the film. The film also has very much a human interest story as well. That's pretty riveting, too. You guys followed 6 kids from Chicago, the Tilden Academy. They won a challenge where they were tasked to prepare a meal that was nutritious and also tasty, and they won a prize. They were able to go from Chicago to D.C. They met with Congresswoman Schakowsky.
Yeah, it was cool. We wanted to make sure that we included the voices of people who were most affected by the policies that we were discussing. And so these kids, their school, everyone, the percentage of students at their school who qualify for free and reduced lunch is 99.8%. So nearly every child at that school gets free or reduced lunch. So they are most affected by policies set at the federal and state level for school lunch funding. So we want to include their voices in the film.
How can people best see the film and find out about it?
People can go to applegatefarms.com and get some information there. Applegate's been a great partner with us on the distribution of the film. They are a good example of a company who's working within the system to make things better, like a lot of these politicians have done, who are not just iconoclastic, but they want to change things from within. Or check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/lunchlinefilm.
Well, Mike Graziano and Ernie Parks, directors of the film Lunchline, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today here on POTUS.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.